Hello, good humans, and welcome back to Self with Amanda. I'm your host, Amanda Tran, and on this podcast, I share ideas, experiences, and have conversations to explore the self. By developing our own self awareness, we can better show up for ourselves and those around us, and hopefully all live happier and healthier lives. Today's episode is about navigating adult friendships, the different types of relationships that we have, why it's so important to have strong friendships, the challenges and complexities that come with that, with sustaining friendships and making new friendships. I'm going to wrap up with some reflection points and some tips on making new friends as well. By the end of my 20s, I realized that there was a huge difference between having acquaintances, peers, a community, and friends. And in this group of friends, something I've learned over the past 30 years is that there are friends who are there for particular seasons in your life, some perhaps just for a reason, and some for life. And I think those life friends you don't realize are life friends until there has been a significant period that's passed, until they've been through the ups and downs of life with you, and you start to realize that this is a life friendship that's emerged from that. Before I started traveling, I was someone who considered myself a person with lots of friends. I thought that I had this huge group of friends all around me as a mixture from my high school, from uni, from work, and from my church. In fact, when I got married, I had such a hard time culling this list. We ended up inviting like 250 people, which for me today seems outrageous because the majority of people there who I considered friends are essentially strangers to me today. And this is a challenge in navigating friendships as an adult. When we remove this place that we have in common, what is left of the relationship? So, when I say that sometimes friends are just for seasons, well, I guess that can be broken down into groups of people who are acquaintances or who are peers, people who you work with, study with, are doing a particular season of life with for a particular circumstance, but not necessarily someone who you are so deeply invested in their life journey and they in yours. I realized when I started traveling how hard it was to sustain true friendships, because by not having the this thing in common, not even just a place, but actually living in the same city anymore and everyone doing their own thing in life, it becomes so hard to genuinely stay connected. And in this time with social media, we have this false sense of connection because we're connected digitally. We see people's stories, we see their posts, and it's really strange because we have updates on what people are doing with their lives, but we might not speak to them. We might not have spoken to them in years. And so there can be somewhat a feeling of closeness or inclusion within their life. But in reality, there might not be anything truly substantial there. When I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about my life. I've shared before in past episodes about how grateful and fortunate I am to have the incredible friendships I have around me. And I was thinking about the challenges of sustaining adult friendships, sustaining friendships that carry through from, say, childhood or from high school through uni and whatnot, and then into life. And then I was also thinking about how hard it is to make new friends, how hard it is to establish new friendships, particularly when you've moved abroad or moved cities or you've, completely turned your whole life upside down, I guess, like me. One of the challenges that I faced when I started traveling was, as I said, one, sustaining friendships, and two, finding the meaning of what it meant for me to be friends with particular groups of people because I was changing so much. And the third thing was, of course, not physically being in one place for a prolonged period of time. When I talk about sustaining friendships, I realized that without having, church to go to on Sunday and having this thing that we were doing together, I fell out of touch with a lot of people. And that's a very natural thing, right? It's not realistic that we can talk to people and spend that same amount of time invested into relationships where we might do because we go to the same church or go to the same school. And so some of these friendships that I considered really good or close friendships just kind of started drifting. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault. But what I realized is with that distance, without having that thing in common, it requires both parties to invest time and energy and effort and to really put that time aside in order for a friendship to continue to flourish. And that means actively including people in your life, even when it's not convenient to. And that's a struggle, right? Sustaining and maintaining a relationship. Sometimes we, maybe not consciously, but we rely on the convenience of it all. And when that convenience is removed, it requires an active decision and effort. And that was something I realized was really hard to do when I was, changing countries every few weeks or so and moving from city to city. And I realized that actually it's not possible for me to have all these friends who I thought were my friends. It's not possible for me to maintain these relationships. And so very naturally, a lot of them just fell away. And that's not to say that some of these people aren't still in my life in some form, but the overwhelming majority are not my friends anymore. I remember having this thought at some point while maybe about a year into backpacking, and I was quite sad about it. I guess I valued friendships so much, and for me, it gave a lot of meaning to my life, being a good friend to others and having so many good friends. Something that I grieved as part of traveling was this recognition that all these people who you call your friends, well, maybe those friendships weren't actually that substantial or had much depth in the first place, and that's okay. But it was a bit sad for me realizing those things and then being able to let that go and say, hey, it's okay that these friendships served a particular season in my life when I was going to church or when I was going to school, when I was, active in particular hobbies. And it's okay that we let some of those go. Because what was so beautiful and what emerged was the life friendships coming from that. But before I go there, I want to touch back on the other challenge I found, which was making new friends. Of course, when you're backpacking, well, the convenient thing about that is you're abroad, you're all foreigners in a place, and you're doing something in common, whether it's an activity or staying at the same hostel. So it's kind of replacing that convenience that I was mentioning about work, church, school, whatever it is. And well, now it's travel. That becomes a convenient thing. However, the beautiful thing about being abroad somewhere completely different is the access to a whole wide variety of people who you would have never met otherwise. And slowly from that, I recognized the depth that friendships could go to in a very short period of time. The wonderful thing about travel is it has the potential to completely open your eyes, open your heart and your mind. And you find yourself having conversations and being among people who think completely differently to you, who have a totally different set of values, who you might not ordinarily interact with. And that was the case for me. I was so sheltered in a way. Yeah, I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. My friends didn't do drugs. Most of my friends didn't drink. And the conversations that we had were often around the similar topics. I was always around people who were essentially an echo chamber for me, who thought similarly because we were all taught to think the same thing, who believed similar things, of course, through religion, and who had similar values to me. Even within the country of Australia, there are still a lot of common values as much as there are differences, but there are. And it's easy to fill your space with people who think, believe, and hold the same values as you. And so I recognize this beautiful space of making new friends and being able to be among people who are totally different to me. And that's when I started making friends actually with people who I might not ordinarily be friends with, and develop close-knit connections that I had never even dreamed was possible. I recognize that actually friendship can extend a lot more beyond having all these things in common, but actually at our core, we had similar values, even if on the outside it looked a bit different. The challenge in making new friends as adults is, first of all, obviously everyone's different. And I think something that we might expect from people is we expect them to be the same as us. Sometimes it's uncomfortable having conversations where you start recognizing these big differences that emerge. And I see it often in people where they will write off some other people, write off some potential friendships because of these differences in viewpoints. And for me, this is one of the flaws of our society, is we typically look for echo chambers. We look for people who are the same as us, and that's who we want to surround ourselves with. The other challenge in making new friends as adults is, of course, these circumstances. Like, we are doing very different things, and wherever you are located, you're kind of just left up to, you're at the mercy of, that's the phrase I was looking for. You're at the mercy of your location. I have friends in Japan who live in Niseko who have expressed how hard it is to make genuine connections and friendships because there's language barriers. There's also a limited amount of people within the community. So people who you genuinely connect with and who you can bond with, that pool of people is quite small. And then the other challenge is when it comes to our existing friendships, perhaps from childhood, from school or whatever, is that we sometimes expect or hope for them to be, life friends, and then we all change. And, it's one thing to have core values where you don't shift so much from and you can still connect with. But then I think something that I realized for myself is that a lot of friendships were just shallow, and they were based off things that didn't really matter to me, but I thought mattered to me. And coming back and revisiting those friendships along my own journey, I recognize that actually we're so different that outside of nostalgia, there's not much that's actually keeping this friendship alive. As I said, one of the beautiful things though, coming into adulthood, coming into knowing who you are, is that the more that you know yourself, the more that you are okay with you and accepting who you are, well, you know the type of people, you know who it is that you truly connect with and are willing to make an effort and put energy into sustaining and maintaining a friendship with. Circling back to the beginning, there's a big difference between acquaintances, peers, community, and friends. They say that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Without knowing your core values, it's really hard to choose who these people are, who you want to be surrounded by. And something I realized for myself coming into my late 20s is that I value growth. Personal growth is one of my core values. Having an open mind, a curious mind, and an open heart, approaching life, I'm sure you've heard me say it, with openness and curiosity, a willingness to be real and authentic and vulnerable and go to dark places. Those are things that I value and what I look for in friends. We don't ultimately have to have the same political values. Political views, sorry. We don't have to have the same religion, the same beliefs. But at our core, that for me is who I am. And I want to be a person who continues to operate from a place of kindness, no matter what is thrown at me, no matter what life throws at me or other people do. And so that's who I want to be surrounded by. And when I look at the people who are closest to me, I'm so grateful and privileged to say that they all embody those values, even if on the outset we look really different. So we've spoken a bit about why maintaining and making new friendships can be hard. And something that I was thinking about is, what is it that we're really looking for when we talk about friendships? Sometimes it's actually just companionship. It's just not wanting to be alone and to feel a loneliness void or some type of emptiness. Sometimes it's a genuine search for connection. Maybe it's a mixture of both. What I realize though is that we don't have to have many people. We don't have to have many friends. And truly quality is much more valuable than quantity when it comes to friendship. I thought about some reflection points in this. And if you're someone who is struggling with navigating adult friendships at this point in time, I thought about a few things that I wanted to ask you and offer you to reflect on. And the first thing is, with existing friendships that you have, are you interested in getting to know your friends for who they are today and not based on nostalgia? And what I mean by that is, when you spend time with people who are your friends, and whether they've been your friends for 10 years or 20 years, do you spend most of the time talking about the good old days? Or are you interested in their life as they are today, who they are today, the person who they are today, who is completely different to perhaps the person who you met or who you've been best friends with for so long? The second reflection point I have for you is, are you open to new friendships and being open and vulnerable to new people? And I know this is a hard one, because coming into, your say 20s and your 30s, we often build some walls around us. We know the people who know us already, and we don't really want to make an effort to put ourselves out there to get to know others. But here's the thing. I'm curious about who you are today and who you were before. And we're not static people. We ourselves are dynamic people. So, are you open at the same time to getting to know you constantly, learning about yourself as a new and interesting person? And at the same time, are you willing to show up to new people and be open with who you are as well? Without a willingness to be open and vulnerable, people see through a lot of the bullshit. And ultimately, when we want what we want are meaningful connections, not just something shallow at the surface, where we see each other once a week because we play soccer or something. Sure, that's fun. That's an acquaintance or a peer, but it's not a true friend. And what's needed for that meaningful connection is vulnerability, is a willingness to show up and say, hey, this is who I am. And I invite you to show up as who you are. And I'm willing to receive that as well. And the third thing I'd like to offer for you to reflect on is, are you afraid of the idea of new friendships? And if so, what scares you about them? And I guess that kind of ties a bit in line with a willingness to be vulnerable. I look at the state of our society where we are digitally connected on so many levels. And yet it's hard to feel true and meaningful connections with people. You might have 1,500 friends on Facebook, but actually only speak to your family. You might feel like you actually don't have people to turn to and who support you and encourage you and celebrate life with you, who you can go to in the deep thick of the crap that life is throwing at you, even though you have hundreds of people watching your stories and liking your posts. It's a confusing time to be a part of because we are so up to date with people's lives and yet at the same time completely disconnected from who they are as people and individuals. So if you're someone who's struggling with making new friends and you're open to new friendships, well, I have a few tips for you, and I hope that you find these helpful. This is something I've learned along the way. First of all, to be willing to accept that it's okay to have friends for a season, a reason, or for life. But the life ones, I think now I'm starting to get, I guess, like a feeling about kind of from the beginning. There are people who I connect with, and there's just this sense of knowing that I know this is going to be quite a long friendship. And of course, emerging from my experience over the past couple of decades are my life friends. I've got a couple of best friends who are more than friends, who are like sisters to me. And I'm quite certain we are going to grow very old together as friends, which is such a beautiful thing to have. So yeah, are you open to just exploring, I guess, the idea that friendship doesn't have to be for life automatically from the beginning? The next thing is putting yourself out there, and that's a hard one, right? Going up to people, trusting your instinct, even if your mind is full of fear and angst about putting yourself out there, and just having a chat to people and seeing where that goes. Of course, if you're also single, then a challenge there might be actually discerning whether you're trying to make friends or if you're trying to hit on someone. So, figure that out. And the other thing, of course, is being available in places. It is hard to make friends if you aren't out and about and doing things. I think one of the best things that we can do is find what matters to us and show up in those spaces. For me, I love freediving. That doesn't mean I'm going to be friends with everyone who's a freediver, but there's particular aspects about freediving that I really love. And being in the space among freedivers, I get to develop incredible connections with people because we have this thing that we already mutually love and we bond over. But of course, from that, again, what emerges are people who you really develop a connection and friendship with, and then some people who you dive with and you have the free diving in common, but they're not necessarily a friend. And I guess finally, a tip is to let people know that you're open to friendships. This might seem a bit strange or feel a bit foreign, but being able to be open and say, hey, I am having a hard time in this new place and I would love to make some new friends. And this is a bit about who I am. I've seen people post these types of posts on Facebook in girl groups in Bali, for example. And what's so wonderful is that you start to see everyone else who is in a very similar situation. And then these opportunities come out where people are willing to show up, meet up with others, and friendships emerge. And again, maybe it could just be that you meet up and you're like, hey, there's no connection. It's a bit like dating, right? And if it works out, and then great, you've got a new friend. And if not, it's all good. But just like dating, it requires you to put yourself out there in order to be seen, in order for the opportunity to be there. And I know that making new friends can be really hard. Sometimes for me, I realize that I get quite tired of small talk and talking about the same things. And it's like, there is something so comforting about talking to people who do already know you. But then every once in a while, I have these incredibly deepening, connecting type conversations with a total stranger. And I'm blown away and I realize how beautiful and wonderful a sudden human to human connection can be with someone who doesn't know anything about you, who doesn't come to you with any preconceived ideas and these, maybe their own expectations of who you are from what they know and whatnot. And then you can just have this connection that flourishes. And whenever I have those, I'm reminded of the beauty of new friendships. So while they may be hard, I implore you and encourage you to continue putting yourself out there, because we are the average of the people who we spend the most time with. And sometimes we outgrow particular friendships. Sometimes our friends outgrow us and life changes and takes us in different directions. We don't have to hang on to the same people who carried us through primary school or high school or through uni. It's okay to ebb and flow and to change. It's okay for some of those friends to come back in and out of your life. I think the main thing is to stay open and curious as to what relationships can bring to us and what we can bring to them as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode and it's given you something to think about. I would love to hear your thoughts on, navigating adult friendships. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can follow me on Instagram at selfwithamanda. You can listen to this show on Spotify or anywhere else you get your podcasts, or watch the show on YouTube. I release episodes every Thursday and I will see you next week. Bye.